Welcome to the Tales of a Gearhead podcast. I'm your host, Stacey David. This podcast is brought to you by LMC Truck. Keep them on the road is their slogan, and they supply the parts to help you do that. Also, Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals and hot rods and enthusiasts alike. If you want quality tools, Cornwell's the place to go. Let's get to it. The subject today is the level 4 frame-off restoration or build. Now, for those of you that haven't been listening to the podcast, you have no idea what I'm talking about, so let me back up a little bit. A few weeks ago, we started laying out the 5 levels of project that somebody can be doing, from building, Tinker Toys to the space shuttle, will fall into one of these 5 categories. And I know that sounds extreme, but it's very self-explanatory once I get into them, once you see what these levels are. Now, the first level, level 1, was just the get it running and driving project. That obviously should be the first project that everybody jumps into. It's a great learning project, a lot of fun, and it doesn't cost you a lot, doesn't take a lot of time. Level 2 is the cosmetic and mechanical restoration project. Now, this is where you will take a vehicle and you will do a cosmetic and mechanical restoration on it, like rebuild the engine or repaint it or do the interior. You still are keeping it pretty much original. Might be doing a little bit of modifications, put a hotter cam in the motor, putting a different carburetor on it, but you're taking a vehicle and you're basically doing a restoration without doing really hardcore stuff. It's once again, a great learning ground on not only the nuts and bolts of a basic automobile, but it also prepares you to go to the next level. Then, of course, level 3 we talked about was the resto mod. This is where you step beyond just doing a cosmetic or mechanical restoration that's original, and you start putting in modern things like a modern engine, air conditioning, modern suspension into an older vehicle. This is what hot rodders have been doing since the 50s. This is the spot where most people live. And this is kind of the last step before things get really serious. Level 4 today that we're going to get into is the ground up or frame off restoration or build. Now, when you look at what's involved in a resto mod, a lot of you guys might be thinking, well, I don't see a whole lot of difference between a resto mod when you're changing out all the suspension and engine and a frame off. Well, there is a big difference. The big difference is the tools it takes to do it and the understanding that you have to have when you start lifting a body off of a frame or taking a subframe out from under a chassis. And first of all, let's just talk about the space that it takes. If you want to undertake a frame-off restoration, a ground-up restoration, it's called a lot of different things, but they're all the same. It's where you take the body off the frame, you need at least 3 bays of workspace. And you're like, well, why 3? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory. 1, you have to have the space for the vehicle. You need the second space for the body you took off. And then you have to have at least 1 bay as workspace, and preferably more. I mean, a vehicle, when you start taking it apart, they spread out, they get really big. They take up a lot of room, if you could see my shop here, you got stuff all over the place. And you have to keep it organized. I've talked about organization a lot, because I think it's the key to having a successful project. And once you start pulling a body off, man, you need to be documenting everything in bags and writing down where it came from. You need to understand, hardware. You need to know when you need to replace stuff. You need to understand frame geometry. You need to understand body geometry before you pull a body off. I can't tell you how many people have been working on like old Broncos and stuff that have a very flexy body, and they go to pull that body off without stressing it up properly, and they bend it all up. They destroy it because they bend it all through the rockers. You got to completely rebuild the body. So there's a lot to lifting bodies off. You got to understand the vehicle you're working on. You got to understand that kind of thing. So you need to have the tools, you got to have the equipment to lift the body off. You have to have a pretty good understanding of body work. You don't have to be an expert yet, but you got to have a pretty good understanding of it because you're getting into some pretty serious stuff. So if you couldn't make a living at a paint and body shop, you probably don't need to be doing, a frame-off build yet. You have to understand engine and drivetrain because this is now, obviously you're getting so far into something that if you start taking things out to people, you're going to spend a fortune. And already, anytime you start dealing with frame-off deals, your prices are starting to step up, even if you're doing the work yourself. Any kind of a project like this, you're looking at a $50,000, $60,000 build just for a good driver. If you sit down with your project planning book and you start laying out what it's going to cost to put in a decent drivetrain, a decent suspension, decent running gear, man, that $10,000 pops almost every time. You know, 10 grand for an interior, 10 grand for paint job, 10 grand for motor stuff. You're 60 grand real quick. Now, can you do it cheaper than that? Sure you can. That's why you need to stay with your project planning book. You really need to be planning and keeping track of your project. And that's the hardest thing for car guys to do. We like to get out and work on stuff. It's like, I'm gonna tear it apart. But then you don't realize you gotta put it back together. So keeping things organized, you know, staying ahead of what you're doing is always key. You gotta have a good knowledge of the vehicle. If you're gonna jump in and you're gonna do a frame-off build on a DeLorean, you better pick yourself up a book and read all about DeLoreans, because you're the one that's going to become the expert on that car. If you're having to go to somebody and pay somebody for their expertise, it's going to get real expensive for you. And you're probably not going to be able to find it if the car's odd. You know, you're going to have trouble finding the right person. So it falls on you. So this is your project. You're the one that's doing it. You have to make sure that you do the legwork so you understand what you're getting into. I remember the first frame-off build that I did, man. The first time I pulled that body up off of there and things fell all over the place. I mean, my initial thought, I was like in high school, man. I was looking at this going, what the heck have I done? You know, things went everywhere, stuff I didn't expect. There were still grounding straps connected to the frame because I didn't know you had to look and find that. And that's how you learn it. You know, sometimes you just make the mistake and then you realize, oh, there's grounding straps connecting the body to the frame. And they snap pretty quick when you put a lift on the body. Obviously, I've done a lot of frame-off stuff on the show. You guys that are into four-wheel drives and trucks, obviously most of those have a frame under them, so that's pretty self-explanatory. But when you get into cars with unibodies, people are like, well, whoa, it's a frame-off. There's not technically a frame, man. How you doing that? I call a frame off anytime you start pulling the subframes out, like on the Camaro or the V8 Interceptor 67 Cougar. Anytime you start cutting the subframes out and doing different suspensions, that goes into a frame off level. Because to do that work right, you better know what you're doing. And that's another thing that I want to bring up. In a level 4, you need to know how to weld. And I don't mean I can stitch a few things together. No, you need to be a certified welder. I mean, to where you can lay down a bead, it would pass. If you're not, you need to get somebody that can do that. And you need to be able to pay for it. This is not the place to be doing hack welding. This is not the place to be learning to weld. That you should have done on the earlier projects. At this level, you need to be able to lay down a safe, solid bead, whether it's MIG or TIG or whatever you're into. If you're an engine builder at this point, you need to be a good engine builder. You need to understand if you're setting up rear end gears, you need to be able to set those up properly. If you're setting up a transmission, you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to do a clutch properly. So to wrap up a level 4, you need to be able to do everything that you can do in a level 1, 2, and 3, but you also have to add the fact that you have to have the skill to be able to pull the body off and deal with that. Now, one of the biggest mistakes that people make is that they jump into a project and they're like, man, I've always wanted to do a ground-up restoration on something. They've never done any of the other projects. Now, I'm not saying that it can't happen. I've seen people do it. I have seen people that jump in and their very first project is a ground-up frame-off deal. So, you know, it can be done. But they jump into it with the proper, first of all, the proper tools. They've prepared themselves and they are prepared to learn and take the time to do the project. So as long as you do it that way, yeah, you can jump in, you can learn to do it, but you just have to take the time to learn the skills and do the thing properly. All right, that's a level 4. A level 5 we'll deal with on another show. We're going to take a break right now. We're going to come back. We're going to answer some of your questions. You know, people ask me all the time, what kind of opportunities are there in the automotive industry? One, if you want to be your own boss, you might want to consider being a Cornwell tool dealer. I mean, they're always looking for people. They have routes everywhere. They're America's oldest tool company. They make the best tools in the industry, and they're a great company to work for. If you're looking to be your own boss, start your own business, and tired of cranking on wrenches, you may want to be a tool dealer. So the question is today, have you seen the little Roxor from Mahindra? In case you don't know, Mahindra is the tractor manufacturer, and they make a little off-road vehicle that looks just like the old Willys Jeep. Matter of fact, they've been making it for decades under license of Jeep. So they came out with the Roxor, which is basically a side-by-side, but it's a little Willys Jeep with a little diesel engine. And now all of a sudden Jeep has come back and said, no, you cannot use that front end. Even though they had changed it, they said you can't use it because it's too much like the Jeep front end. So Mahindra has come out with another version that looks like the Toyota Land Cruiser. So we will see what happens with that. It's actually a pretty cool vehicle. We were looking maybe to get one to do some testing with it on the show. Check them out if you get a chance. It's ROXOR. And let us know what you think about it. Let us know if you think they're infringing on the Jeep dynasty with that thing. All right, we got a question here from Keith Darlington. I'm going to go ahead and read the question, and then we'll see if we can get an answer for him. He says, I've got myself a 53 Chevy 3100 5-window truck. It's got a 327 in it, 350 transmission. He says, I love the truck so far. He said, I got it for me and my dad to have a project to work on together. He says, my only issue with the truck is it's on a long bed frame. He said, now the original owner did an S10 swap. I assume he's talking about doing an S10 frame swap. And he says, I want to get it back to a short bed frame, but I'm trying to avoid the cost of a new frame. He says, most of what I've found has been for 68 and up. And he wants to know if the process that we did on the show where I cut down the frame would work on this project. Or is the conversion kit from Brothers Truck, will that work? He says he's just learning mechanics as he goes, and his father, and they've never done any kind of frame swap before. This is a pretty common question because swapping frames was really popular a while back. And basically, just so you guys, if you don't know, the S10 trucks that they made, you know, in the late 80s, into the 90s, into the 2000s, had a really solid frame underneath them. So what guys would do, they would take an old rusty truck, drop it down on the modern frame, and would save them some time in building the truck. The problem with doing an S10 frame swap is if you really don't know what you're doing, and Keith, this is something that you really need to look at. If the person didn't really know what he was doing, your wheelbase could be wrong, your body mounts could be wrong, you could have some cooling system issues, your steering column could be a problem. There's a lot of things that come to swapping a body onto a different frame, not just the wheelbase. So that's the first thing to look at. I'd crawl into that thing, go under it with a fine-tooth comb, because you're probably going to find some other issues under there. You know, how did he weld on the body mounts? That's always a question. So now if it all checks out, let's talk about this. Okay, so you want to cut the frame down. Now the process that I used when I cut down the 67 through 72 Chevy C10 frame, that process would work, but where I cut it and how much I cut it would be totally different on an S10. So it would be up to you to figure out where you would cut it, how you would cut it, how much you would take off here, there. It's all on you, man. If you've done no frame, I'm reading your letter here, it says you haven't really done any frame work, frame swaps, man, this sounds like this is out of your wheelhouse. So what I would suggest that you do is go to somebody like Fat Man Fabrications or TCI or Heights, one of these street rod companies that make these really nice frames. You got, you know, the Roadster Shop makes something. It's really a hot thing now to go out and just buy an aftermarket frame. And a lot of times you can buy these frames, it'll be right for your body. You can drop it right down on there. Now, some of those frames can get expensive, $13,000, $15,000, $20 grand, depending on what, you know, what kind of rear end and all that stuff you're putting into it. But you don't have to load it up with all that. You know, just a bare frame, you know, $6,000, $7,000, depending on what you get. You'll shop around, see what you can find. That still may be out of your price range, but if it is, then we're back to square one where you have to solve the problem by yourself. Let's say that that's the issue. Okay. So then you would want to look at exactly how that thing is set down on the frame and how you would have to fix it. And if you don't know, if you can't weld, you're going to have to go somewhere and have it done, and that could get really expensive. And my suggestion on that would be to get a different frame, get the right frame. Now, here's another thing. The 53 Chevy trucks, those frames are out there because a lot of guys are taking those trucks and putting replacement frames under them. So original frames are out there. You just have to kind of look. They're in a lot of junkyards. See, keep in mind, most of these trucks, the bodies are what rusted out. So people are trying to find good bodies. If you've got a good body, Finding a frame is not hard. I would go on eBay, I would check some of the swap places, put the word out to some of these truck places. Now, you may have to get a long bed frame and then cut it down, but at least you're starting with the original frame. The problem that you're going to have here is this S10 deal. And listen, man, I've seen some serious hackery over the years with people putting things down on these frames. So I don't have a good feeling about this for you. So that would be my suggestion on it. Now, you did ask about this conversion that Brothers Trucks makes. This is actually a pretty good piece. If you guys aren't familiar with it, it is a kit that allows you to take a long bed to a short bed for the 67 through 72 Chevys. Could something like that be adapted? Probably. Once again, could something like that be used? Probably not on an S10 frame. I wouldn't suggest it. The Brothers kit was made for guys really that don't know how to weld. And it allows you to put a frame together and bolt it back together, kind of like the bolt-in C-notch kits. Now, let me just give you a little thing with that. I am not a big fan of bolting frames back together, and here's why. If you look at the stock frame on a vehicle, you'll notice that it is not welded together, but it's actually riveted together. And basically the way they do it, it's the same way they build bridges. They take these red-hot rivets and they pound them in there, and they're better than a weld, because it keeps the frame from moving and coming apart, but it also allows the frame to flex where a weld would crack. And that's why they rivet frames together. And the rivets don't ever get loose. Bolts eventually come loose. So even if I was doing one of the Brothers kits, which like I said is a nice kit. Now here's a question for you, Keith. Do you just want to drive the truck and enjoy it? If so, why not just drive it the way it is? And then see if you can find a frame or something and learn some of the skills that you're looking to get into, because this project, that when you start to get into frames and welds and things like that, you're starting to talk about foundational aspects of a vehicle, and you screw those up, it becomes a dangerous vehicle. It's not like you just run out of gas on the side of the road. Your wheels fall off and put you on the side of the road. So these are areas that you really need to know what you're doing. And it's definitely something you can learn. You're maybe jumping into something that is going to take you into a price range you don't want to do. So if it's just something you want to have some fun with, drive the truck as it is, enjoy it, and see what you want to do. You know, back when I was first getting into working on cars, when you needed parts, you went to the salvage yard, or the junkyard as we always called it. Well, those days are kind of gone. So the question is, where do you find good replacement parts? Well, you've heard me talk about LMC truck all the time, and that's one of the main reasons. Flip open one of their catalogs or go online and look at it. It's almost like an owner's manual. There's an exploded diagram of the vehicle. You can see where the parts go. Man, it's such a great way to help you with a project, especially if you're not familiar with it, and it's also a great source of getting the parts you need. Have you ever been working on something and all of a sudden things just go completely wrong? Listen, it happens to everybody. It happens to the best. You know, it happens to the worst. That kind of thing shows no mercy to anybody. You can be going along on a project, you've got everything figured out and everything's going great and the birds are chirping and the pizza's warm and everything's happening, and all of a sudden, in a split second, that project can take a really bad turn. And I'm not talking put you in the hospital turn. That's a whole nother conversation. I'm talking just things can happen. For example, this is what happened to me the other day. We're doing this Jeep on the show for Best Top. I got a brand new Jeep Gladiator in here, and I'm going to swap out the hood for this really cool fiberglass hood. Okay, it's a hood. It's 4 bolts. How long is it going to take? 30 seconds? Pop those bolts loose? That's what I thought. That's what it usually takes. That's what it normally should take. But oh no, not today. Keep in mind, these hoods are put on with these big star bolts. And if you guys aren't familiar with the what we call the star bit or the Torx bit, T-O-R-X, just has a star shape in it. This is not a small star bit either. This is the T50. This is a big sucker. I get on the first bolt and I have my long-handled 3/8" ratchet. I almost can't break this thing loose. It breaks loose so hard that it reverses my ratchet when it snaps loose. So I'm like, okay, this isn't good. So I get around, I get to that last one, and I can't get it to break loose. So I get my big long-handled. Now I got like a 20-inch handle. And I start twisting on this thing, and I shear off my hardened Torx bit. I've never even seen that done before. It breaks it off in the bolt. Now keep in mind, this is hardened steel that's in there, so now I can't drill it out. So what was a 30-second, 2-minute job has turned into an ordeal, because now I've got to get down underneath that broken out piece of Torx bit and get it out. So the next 2 hours I'm drilling, trying to get down underneath it, trying to get this thing, which has become welded into the Torx bolt. And eventually I'm trying two approaches. I'm either trying to get the broken piece out, or I'm trying to get it to where I can get a chisel on the outer edge of the bolt and hammer it to knock it loose to where I can actually get the bolt to turn. Either that or break it off. It doesn't matter if I break it off, I just need to get it out because I'm replacing the hood. And after, seriously, about an hour and a half, I finally get the thing to break loose after I've gone through a couple bits and all kinds of stuff. And the moral of the story is, guys, you never know when this kind of thing is going to happen. So you have to be prepared. I'm always talking on the show, make sure that you have a well-stocked toolbox. Make sure that you have these things. It's not so you can show them to your friends and say, hey man, check out my toolbox. Now, it's not that, although that's kind of fun sometimes. What you want it for is at any given time, you might need some sort of easy outs, you might need drills, you might need hammers, you might need chisels to get you out of a spot. Because working on these vehicles, these things like to throw you curves. That's why it's fun. That's why we like to do it. But that's also why you need to be prepared. So anyway, I thought I would share that with you. Now you know how to get rid of a broken off Torx bit. Hope I never have to do another one. It was a real pain. Keep in mind, this podcast is made possible by our friends at LMC Truck and our friends at Cornwell Tools. All right, that wraps it up for us today. It is time for you to get out there, start working on something, build something with your own two hands, send in your questions, send in your pictures, let us know what you're working on. All right, we'll see you later.